mission to change the narrative for symphony orchestras. A lot of people do know me from my work at the California Symphony. I just wrapped up 5 years there this summer, as Doug mentioned. And what you need to know about the California Symphony is that over those 5 years, we doubled our audience and nearly quadrupled the donor base. Who here wants to double their audience and quadruple the donor base? Love it, good. So I left this summer to make an impact beyond one organization, doing more talks like this, consulting with different institutions across the country, orchestras and other nonprofits, and beyond the US even, some of that work has come about. And as Doug said, I joined the San Francisco Conservatory of Music to found and direct the new Center for Innovative Leadership, training orchestra managers, leaders, all the way from entry level to board members so that we can do this work better and better in our communities. So by way of introduction, just to tell you a little more, Doug mentioned this too, before coming to California, I spent about 10 years in Seattle, there working for the leading institutions, Seattle Symphony, Seattle Opera, and the Bumbershoot Music and Arts Festival. And all of this intro is to say that my experience is at organizations of all sizes. And at every one of those organizations, we had the same problem. That problem is that the struggle is real. So what do I mean by that? I mean the current narrative at orchestras, at any performing arts organization really, the current narrative is that it is a struggle to balance our budget every year, a struggle to grow our audiences, grow our donor base, to do the innovative work that so many of us want to be doing. In other words, it is a struggle to stay relevant, right? So why is this happening? There are symptoms of this problem, I should say. What are the symptoms of this problem? Why am I saying this? Why am I saying the struggle is real, besides our own personal experience for those of us working in these jobs? The first symptom is that nationwide, the statistic for American orchestras is that 90% of first-time attendees never come back again. 90% of first-time attendees at American orchestras never come back again. The struggle is real. Another symptom of this problem is that now nationwide, as of 2014, single ticket revenue at orchestras, meaning people coming to 1 or 2 concerts, single ticket revenue has surpassed revenue from subscriptions, subscribers, season ticket holders. That's a big shift that happened in 2014 nationwide. The struggle is real. No efficiencies in our organizations. To run an orchestra, it never ever gets cheaper the following year to do what we do. It's a very labor-intensive art form. We can never play Beethoven faster. There's no efficiency there. We can never play Beethoven with fewer players, really. Combine all of that with this incredibly labor-intensive art form, and there are virtually no efficiencies to be realized. That means every year our costs rise, 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 guaranteed. You put all of that together, and what I'm trying to say is that combined with a cost challenge, our audiences, 90% never return, more revenue from single ticket holders than season ticket holders. Our audiences are becoming less loyal. That's a challenge. The struggle is real. So the struggle is not new, though. These things that I'm saying, these challenges have been around for 30, 40, 50 years for orchestras, right? So it's not new, but we are at a tipping point, I contend. And I'm here to talk about why that is and what we can do about it. And the California Symphony is a case study in how one orchestra completely defied the trends of the industry, defied the current narrative. So let's take a look at first, what's causing this problem? There are 4 reasons why the struggle is happening. The first is we are asking the wrong questions. As institutions, we ask questions like, should we serve the art or should we serve our community? And maybe that question would make sense if we were publicly funded, but we're not. We are funded primarily by people. People through ticket revenue, buying those single tickets, buying those subscriptions, and people making donations. Any budget for any orchestra, make no mistake about it, virtually 80%, I mean the majority of the revenue always is people, not institutions, not grants, not government in America. Are we serving the art or the community? We are in the business of serving people is the answer. Another question we ask sort of incorrectly is going back to this idea of relevance. How do we remain relevant? And what's so crazy to me about a question like that is we, as arts managers, we don't get to decide who's relevant. If we're relevant, we don't get to decide that. The patron decides that. The patron decides if we are relevant by how they invest their money with us. If they're coming, if they're buying tickets, if they're making donations, they choose for any business, any brand, in any industry. We don't get to decide that. So this idea of relevance, to take it a step further, there is a firm in San Francisco where I'm from called Profit. Every year they release their ranking and relevance index for the most relevant brands across the country. These are all brands that we've heard of. Netflix, Marvel, Pixar, Amazon, Nike, PlayStation, Spotify, Apple, brands that are so just permeating our own lives. And what this firm says about relevance is that for these brands that make this list year after year, the #1 indicator of a brand being relevant or not and how far up that list they rank, the #1 indicator is if they are customer obsessed. So all this is to say, all these questions, how do we stay relevant? Who are we serving, the art or the community? We are serving people. We are serving our customers. And to be customer obsessed is a way forward for our organizations. So we're asking the wrong questions. That's the first reason why this struggle is real. The second reason why this struggle, why this problem exists, is antiquated marketing. We are now 20% into the 21st century. So when we say comments like, we need to get our marketing in the 21st century, that's like AOL Instant Messenger days. It's 2020, the 21st century is 1/5 over. It is passing us by. So we've got to get out of this mentality of like, if we could just get in the 21st century, no way, then we're automatically 20 years behind still. So another point to put with this, there's an author I love, his name is Mark Schaefer. He writes in his book, The Marketing Rebellion, that 2/3 of any brand's marketing is not done by the brand. The way our consumer behavior has shifted is that 2/3 of marketing for any brand comes from the customer, or potential customers even. What do I mean? I mean that's word of mouth, that's social media, online reviews. All of those things are other people talking about our brand, and 2/3 of it is out of our control. That's a big shift as marketers that we have got to realize that if we're going to be customer obsessed, we got to help those 2/3 control that message and get the right messages out for us and empower them to do that. The third reason why the struggle is real, why this problem is happening, is that our audiences are not reflective of the communities we serve. NEA data shows that the demographic breakdown for orchestra audiences, attendance at classical music in America, is that 83% of the audiences are white. This data is as of 2012. 83% white. We know our demographics have shifted even since then, but latest data, 83% white, another 5% Hispanic, another 5% African American, and the remaining 7% is sort of other or unknown. Compare this to 2010 census data in the United States, so sort of the same years, and as we know, we're about to enter another census period, but as of 2010, the census data showed that America was 72% white. So already, with antiquated data that we know has changed, American classical music audiences are over-indexing for white people. This is important to know. Our audiences are not reflective of the communities we serve. And it's changing fast. Pew Research says that 22 states in our country and 109 counties within those states now have become, since the 2010 census, have become majority non-white. The Brookings Institute, just to put another third party's data behind it, says that the United States will become minority white by 2045. We are not thinking about the communities around us changing. Our audiences are not reflective of the communities that we serve. The fourth reason why the struggle is real is because we are not on the same team. On stage and off, sorry guys, we have an us versus them mentality. Musicians, management, inside our organizations we have silos, marketing, development, education, production, programming. We're not always working together, we're not always breaking those silos down. We are not on the same team, on stage and off. So you put all of these things together, and no wonder why we're having a challenge. There's a lot stacked against us right now at Orchestras. So if that's why these things are happening, now let's look at solutions. The solution is in three parts. The first is, if we're going to be customer obsessed, listen to our customers. We're going to talk about UX research. The second part of the solution is to design for loyalty. If 90% are not coming back, if there's more single ticket revenue than subscriptions and season ticket revenue, what are we going to do to design for the desired behavior that we need at our institutions? And the third part of the solution is fostering a sense of inclusion and diversity. How do we adapt what we're doing to meet the needs of the changing demographics of America? How do we adapt what we do to combat that us versus them mentality and the silos in our institutions? All of this is to say, all three parts of the solution are about creating a sense of belonging at our orchestras. So let's unpack all that. Listen to our customers. Some of you I know are followers of my work, so you have read about the Orchestra X project. To bring everybody up to speed on the same page, the Orchestra X project was affectionately named after Google X. Google X was the company's experimental research arm. Being in the Bay Area, Google, of course, is a neighbor of ours, and we said, we want to know, why is it that 90% of newcomers are never coming back? And we said, okay, let's ask them. UX research, user experience research, when you go to your users, your customers, and ask them about it. So we said we want people who should go to the symphony, but don't, meaning people who are millennials and Gen Xers, who are smart, culturally aware, who do have expendable income and do frequent other live entertainment options, but for whatever reason, don't go to the symphony. We said, if that's you, we want to hear from you. And so they came to a few concerts. One concert in particular was required to have a shared experience from which to be the basis of our discussion. And we said, our promise is that we will listen only and not jump to defense, which I can attest was an exercise that proved tremendously difficult. And what's interesting about the results of that focus group, UX research, whatever you want to call it, is not one person said, I need a shorter concert, or if you could just play more Beethoven, or less Beethoven, or please play more Harry Potter. Nobody said anything like that. Instead, when we talked about the music itself, the response from everybody in the group, first-timers, was, I felt awe. 80, 90 people on stage together, I felt awe. So it's not the music. The music is actually what we do best as orchestras. And instead, what we learned was that they said, it's everything else tangential to the experience that's keeping me away, that is the problem, that's leading to that 90% not coming back. They said things like, wow, Aubrey, your website reads like Inside Baseball. They said, I don't know what to wear. It's not that I don't want to dress up. Anybody who thinks that the young people don't want to dress up, just stop, because that's not what it was. It was, I don't know, and I want to make sure I'm appropriate and I fit in. I don't know when to applaud. I don't want to be shushed. I do want to make sure that what I'm doing is like the correct participatory behavior. And all of this was causing stress and concern, two complete negative emotions associated with the experience we were trying to provide. In other words, we learned our orchestra concerts were intimidating, they were unwelcoming. There was no sense of belonging for newcomers. So NEA data, going back to that, says the number one reason people attend arts and culture events are to socialize with family and friends. Arts and culture events, the number one reason is to, what would be another way to say it? Enjoy a sense of belonging, right? The number two reason is to see a specific program or exhibit, or something like that. So to say it differently, the Orchestra X project revealed to us that there is an incredible knowledge gap that exists between a first-timer and somebody who's come more regularly and knows more about the art form. A knowledge gap between a first-timer and somebody who has wanted to lead an orchestra since she was 16 years old and has eaten, slept, breathed classical music for the majority of her life. I had to ask myself, why do I preach that the decline in music education in our public school system is a huge driver for attrition in our audiences, and yet I realized, why had I done nothing to change the way we talk about our product and our experience when the people we're now trying to serve are a direct result of that lack of education, grown adults. It's not basic knowledge, it's not foundational knowledge if it was never taught in the first place. Listen to our customers. So if that's part one, listen to our customers, fix the experience and response. We made a lot of changes on our website, in the concert hall, in our program book, in response to all of that. So listen and fix it. Step one. So part two of the solution runs in parallel to that, and that is to say, if our audiences are becoming less loyal, behavior is pliable. So let's design for the desired behavior, which is loyalty. What's so interesting about the loyalty conversation to me is that orchestras were, in fact, early adopters of the subscription model. A model that is so prevalent more than ever today in 2020, right? Think about this. Who here is a subscriber to Netflix? Yeah, almost all of us. What else? What else is something we subscribe to? Spotify. Newspapers. Some people, yeah, of course. I get my dog's food delivered to my door every 2 weeks, you guys.
Yeah, cat litter.
No, cat litter? Yeah, we totally live by subscriptions. It's convenient, it makes our lives better. That model is not dead. That model is alive and well. So when we think about subscriptions, what I said before is orchestras were early adopters of that subscription model. We were very smart 40, 50, 60 years ago when subscriptions began. And then what happened? I said this at the top. Fixed costs began to rise. And in response to that, our institutions did actually become very adaptive, very savvy. We, over the last 40, 50 years, have become more savvy with our marketing. We do know how to run digital ads in general these days. We do know how to run social media campaigns. We have adopted those channels by and large. We have changed our communication strategies. Fundraising, boy, have we got our act together usually, especially the bigger institutions where they know every way how to ask for a gift. Mass mailings, in person, emails, institutions, foundations, I mean, you name it. Planned giving. Our institutions have by and large become very savvy with marketing and fundraising, very adaptive, I should say, maybe more than savvy. But what's happened more recently is like the squeeze has sort of continued as those fixed costs have continued to rise. What has happened is that the short-term pressure to cover those costs of this very expensive art form has resulted in an unintended consequence, which is the goal has sort of gotten away from us. We've been disincentivizing loyalty because in the short term, it's easier to solicit somebody right away who's just bought a ticket for a season ticket or for a donation. And some of those things do work, and as we know, especially those of us working at performing arts organizations, whatever we don't sell in tickets, we got to make up the rest in fundraising. And that's how we balance our budget. That's why we're nonprofits, because we require this additional funding to balance the budget. And all of that together, it really has, like I said, the goal has gotten away from us. Who here has heard of mission creep or mission drift? Yeah, some of you. That's what happens when the goal gets away from you. So let's take a look at what normally happens at a symphony orchestra. I'm going to walk you through sort of the typical journey at a performing arts organization for a typical patron. And then we'll compare what the California Symphony did to design for the desired behavior. So we said, if somebody comes for the first time to an orchestra concert, they're a first-time attendee, what's the first thing that happens after they buy a ticket? They get a phone call asking for a donation. Oftentimes is the case. And the marketing department says, well, wait. We are so savvy and adaptive. We have put that tracking cookie all over their computer so that we're now showing them digital ads on every device they have. And the development department says, well, wait. We have a direct mail appeal going out. That prospect should be on that list as well. And then the marketing department says, well, hey, season renewal, season announcement time. That prospect might want to be a season subscriber. They came once, maybe they are ready to buy a package at this point. And instead what happens with all of these different messages is that nothing is focused, and instead our customers are being bombarded with information and different asks without one clear pathway forward on how to engage with the organization. So then what happens? Well, as we know, 90% of those people say, I'm out. I'm done. That means 10% are remaining. 10% then sort of make their way to a repeat performance. We then call them a multi-buyer or a repeat buyer. And then what happens? This whole rigmarole happens all over again to that person. And then what happens? Some of those people really love what we're doing and they keep coming back. Some of them do become a season ticket holder. Some of them do renew those season tickets, although I will say here this is another critical point of inflection. Nationwide for American orchestras, among first-year season ticket holders, 50% do not renew that season ticket package. I see nodding heads. Half of our new subscribers. So if we were to do the math, that's a percentage of a percentage of a percentage. It's just, we're not letting people move up through the pipeline. So eventually, orchestras do kind of get our act together. By the time somebody becomes a donor, and especially a renewing donor, and definitely by major donor, we have a plan for those donors and supporters. And a lot of times we call that moves management, we call that cultivation plans. At that point, we get really focused on how we want to move them toward further engagement. So all of this typical audience journey, who here thinks that looks kind of like a mess? If you think that, there's a really good reason that you think that. It's because it is a giant mess. I call this the free-for-all model. So what we've done at the California Symphony is we said, if we're going to design for loyalty, let's clean this up and give every one of our patrons, no matter who they are, from first-time attendee to repeat buyer to first-time subscriber to renewing subscriber to donor and major donor, no matter where you fall on that spectrum, let's offer them one next step and one next step only, so that there is a clear path forward and what we hope that they will choose to engage with us and how they will choose to engage with us. So no matter where you are, we have a plan for you. And what is equally important to what we do is what we don't do, and that is to say, we do not solicit for a subscription when they're a first-time buyer. We don't solicit for a donation until they are a renewing subscriber, second-year subscriber or higher. All the data says at that point, they're in. By the time they're a second year and definitely third-year season ticket holder, they are very loyal at that point. Then is the right time to start asking for the next level of support in the form of a donation. So what's also different about this model is that instead of different departments, the marketing department and the development department, both sending all those messages, instead we said we will have one patron loyalty team overseeing these relationships in a really deliberate and really focused way. This is a long-term approach. It is a complete institutional mind shift in how we approach being customer-obsessed, how we approach designing for loyalty, and a shift to say that you belong here. No matter who you are, we are here to develop a relationship over the long haul. The third reason, or third part of the solution rather, is to foster a sense of diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion matters, actually matters. So one participant in the Orchestra X project said, you go to a place to experience culture, but the lack of diversity made it feel uncultured. That's what I just heard. Diversity is a noticeable problem, and a new person at my orchestra noticed it right away, and yes, it did negatively impact that person's experience. So here's how most orchestras approach the diversity issue. In the same way I said before, here's what a typical patron journey is, and then what we did in response to it. A typical approach for many orchestras in this country to diversity is via programming. So many orchestras say we will program our Dia de los Muertos concert, or the mariachi band if we want to attract Hispanic and Latino Latinx audiences. Some orchestras will say February is Black History Month. That's when we'll program and celebrate our composers of color. Chinese New Year just happened. There were a lot of Chinese New Year's concerts I saw around the country. And similarly, programming in silos is what this is, by the way, programming in silos. Similarly, this happens when orchestras are also trying to appeal to other demographics like younger audiences, Harry Potter in concert. And all of those things that I've said, they do sell. That's the thing. They do sell. They sell in the short term. Why? Because they're popular. There is, and a lot of times, really a lot of goodwill behind those concerts. So I'm not totally slamming them. But what I'm saying is that the same struggle, the same problem persists when programming is our method of solution. And that problem is that 90% of all of those attendees also don't come back. And all of us who are working at these institutions knows that that's true. They don't come back to the core repertoire or our masterworks programming. So instead, if programming is not the solution to solve this challenge of diversifying our audiences, what then do we do? It doesn't start externally. It starts internally, is the answer. So at the California Symphony, in response to these comments in our Orchestra X research, we said we are going to make a public commitment to diversity across every facet of our organization. We said for our programming on stage, at the time we said we commit that 20% of our programming across the entire season, not just in a dedicated concert, but across the entire season, will be dedicated to underrepresented composers and composers of color, female composers, composers of color, living composers as well. And in fact, we would have quotas, benchmarks to hit of each of those in a given season so that we're not over-indexing on living white male composers in that group. The national average at the time for programming underrepresented composers was 2%. So our fairly meager sounding 20% commitment was 10x the industry average. I'm happy to report this past season, or this season we're in now, 1920 season, without changing our own rule, we programmed 45% of our season underrepresented composers. And in fact, it was equal numbers, 15% women, 15% composers of color, and 15% living composers. So we forced ourselves by giving ourselves goals in the same way we give ourselves ticket revenue goals, donation goals. We said, let's have a programming goal and hold ourselves to it. That's what we did in programming. We also said, when we look at our guest artists and who we're going to bring in, For every white male guest artist or guest conductor, soloist or conductor, we bring in, can we also add to that list a woman, guest artist or conductor, or artist of color, person of color, soloist or conductor? We said, okay, for everyone, we got a match. On the board, we said the same thing. For every white male that we bring onto our board, can we please also vet and recruit a female person of color? And in fact, can we not just have one of each of those? When I first started at the California Symphony, there was one woman board member. And I remember sitting in my first board members thinking, does anybody else see this? So what we don't want is tokenism. We don't want somebody to be the only female or the only person of color in the room. So we said also, can we try to recruit a class of board members at a time? And if that includes some white males that are perfectly vetted and a good fit for our board, that's okay too. But then we bring all these newcomers in at once, and they're a class together whose opinions and voices can be heard together instead of a one-off only tokenism. We started seeing, before I get to that, I forgot me. I had to seriously check my own biases. Why did my staff all look white just like me? And I realized there are a lot of things that we do in the way we hire other people to come work for us that, myself included, just were rife with unintentional bias. And so I said, okay, look, I've got to make sure that when I'm interviewing or posting a job description, that I'm actually putting on there the skills that are absolutely required for the job and nothing more. I've got to make sure we don't use language like, I need a real rock star at this because that gender's male. I need to make sure that on our applications or on our job postings, rather, we say things like, Alana candidates welcome, Asian, Latinx, African American, Arab, what else am I forgetting? Alana, Native American. And put out a call saying everybody is welcome here. We started doing all that. The things that I was doing to check my biases started working. Our staff began to diversify with the new hires that I made. It expanded the talent pool of the kinds of wonderful people, talented people applying to work at my organization. And then when we started seeing change internally, then we started seeing some change in our audience, right? And then we saw there was extra revenue coming from that, right? More people, growing audience. Combine that with the long haul model you saw up there with the loyalty efforts, and we did start seeing real big changes in our audience overall and the growth it was experiencing. We were adding performances, and then we said, we got to put our money where our mouth is. So we said, we're going to start running some ads in English and in Spanish. And the community where the California Symphony is based, just about 20 miles east of San Francisco, is 25% Hispanic and Latino, and that was the biggest demographic after white residents. And we said, okay, that's where we're going to focus some of our energy as a pilot test to see, could this work? And we said, okay, in the same way that our digital advertising targets specific messages, the family concerts go to the families, the Harry Potter concerts do go to the Pops audiences, the Masterworks concerts, those ads are shown to classical music lovers. In the same way, we're targeting these ads. Can we not also translate our ads into Spanish and show them to Spanish speakers in our community and see what happens? We decided that was the easiest, cheapest way, remember, nonprofit, that we could test this. Then we started seeing more change in our audience. We started seeing more Spanish speakers buy tickets. And then we got some grant funding, because a grantor was very interested in seeing what was going on, to redesign our whole website. Because what was happening was that people were clicking on an ad in Spanish and then landing on an English website, but still buying tickets. We were still seeing some success, but then got the grant money to redesign the website, so then the entire online experience was also in that language, a much better experience for the customer, right? And then one day, I realized, well, then they come to the concert hall and the program book's in English and everything else is in English. So I said, thank goodness I took some high school Spanish. I gotta welcome them from the stage in Spanish. So brushed up a little bit, figured out how to rattle off 1 or 2 lines welcoming the group. And in the same way, I would give remarks in English, I would give remarks in Spanish. As we began adding concerts, that didn't scale. I can't attend every single concert, and especially at a bigger orchestra, that's not scalable for the CEO. Turns out that we had several musicians in our orchestra said, hey, I can do that, I speak some Spanish. Then our musicians became engaged in the process. sort of welcoming our audiences. Then, because my staff had diversified, one of my senior staffers was a Latina woman, and she said, Aubrey, do you mind if I use some of my professional development budget to take Spanish classes here? I spoke a little bit growing up, but I want to get more fluent. I think that would really help me in some of my education work with our very underserved, very impoverished community where they are majority Hispanic and Latino and Spanish speakers at home. And I want to help with some of the things you're seeing from your digital ads. What do I mean by that? We had started seeing, in response to our digital ads, people messaging us on our Facebook page in Spanish. How do I buy tickets? When is the next concert? So on one hand, we were onto something. People were engaging. On the other hand, what do? You can't just call your translator and say, 24 hours from now, I'll get back to the person who's messaging us. So now I have an employee who's representative of that community saying to me, I want to use my professional development budget so I can learn Spanish so I can help with my own job in the education department, but help you in marketing as well. I told her yes, by the way. That would be okay. So to put all of this into perspective with a finer point, I mentioned 25% of our community was Hispanic and Latino. Already, as I said, our audiences had been growing, so much so that we had added performances in the season where all of this started happening. Added what amounted to 33% more seat inventory over the season before. That's a big increase. So do the math with me here. 33% more inventory if we were in Walnut Creek, California, to diversify our audience so that our audience was representative of our community. That would mean 25% of our audience was Latinx. If we were to do the same thing with Asian audiences, go from a baseline, the Latinx baseline, by the way, was 2 to 3%. 2 to 3% on any given performance. If we were to grow that to 25% to be representative of our community, if we were to do the same thing with Asian audiences, baseline about 6 to 8% on any given night, grow that to be representative, that would be up to 12, 15%. If we were to do that, every one of those newly added seats would be filled with need to add more. Diversity matters, not just because it's the right thing to do, not just because with the demographics of our country that are changing and grantors are watching us and there's like our feet are kind of being held to the fire on this, not just because of all of that, but because when we do all of these things, when we truly foster a sense of inclusion and belonging in our communities, there is revenue on the table. It matters from a business case perspective, also, in addition to all these other reasons, to do this work. So to wrap us up, there are 3 big conclusions in all of this. All of this, as I've said, is about creating a sense of belonging. Newcomers, it means newcomers saying, I didn't feel alienated, I didn't feel intimidated, I didn't feel ostracized because I didn't know when to applaud or how to pronounce that foreign language name that I'm not sure what it is. It means that a staff member was using their professional development budget to learn Spanish so they could help us do this work better and on the fly quickly inside our organization. It means people messaging us in Spanish on our Facebook page. It's not just about one demographic, to be clear. It's about people. Our customer, being customer obsessed. It's about creating a company culture that says, I see you, no matter who you are. Whether you're a first-timer, a long-timer, whether you're 28 or 88, whether you're white or person of color, musician or management. I see you. The second conclusion is that this is work. It is time, yes, it takes a lot of time, but it is also cognitive work to do all of this. The reason for that is because it is our default as human beings to gravitate toward people who are like us, period. That's our default as human beings. But to know that is to be able to take steps to combat that. So it is cognitive work, in other words, to be aware that that is our tendency, and cognitive work to say, I am going to take steps to do it differently. It is cognitive work to listen to new audiences who don't know classical music like some of us, but are smart adults and want to learn and want to figure out how to engage with this art form. It is cognitive work to restructure our entire org chart to put the patron at the center. It is cognitive work to question the requirements listed in the job description. Do we really need a master's degree or 5 years of experience, or is it possible that somebody could be qualified without that credential? Check my biases. It is cognitive work. Okay, the musicians and the people really working at orchestras in the room will get this. It's pretty specific, but it is cognitive work to question if trial weeks after a musician already won an audition is really helping evaluate a player's ability who has already proven themselves to be an excellent player because they won the audition, and ask ourselves, is it that? Or is it just giving us an out for somebody who plays just fine, but makes us feel a little uncomfortable because they're different? And lastly, the third conclusion is that it can be done. The California Symphony, for whatever it's worth, our concert capacity increased. As I said, we were selling out performances. We had to add even more. This current season, we added even more than that 30% a couple of years ago, 33%. What orchestra in America is adding performances due to the insatiable demand for classical music? So here's what happens. Some other stats first. Our website metrics improved. 12% was the increase of people moving from those concert landing pages onto the purchase path. 12% increase moving on the purchase path, pretty good. This translated to subscription sales. All of our work meant that instead of 50% not renewing, across our entire subscriber base, up to 90% renewal rates. They felt like they belonged. So here's what I hear when I give this talk from organizations small and large. Small organizations say, Aubrey, fine, this is good, whatever, but I don't have the people or resources to do this work. Large organizations say to me, Aubrey, this is good, fine, whatever. I don't have the people or resources to do this work. And I also hear, well, we've been doing some of these things. Everything I've said has been done in other industries. None of this is new. None of this is radical. If the things that you're doing at your institution and your ensemble are working for you, then great. But if they're not, we have got to try something different. Because we know the end of the story the way it's being written right now. And what all of this is a different story than pretty much every other orchestra in this country. I am on a mission to change the narrative for symphony orchestras, and I hope you all will join me. Thank you.